going to start out talking a little bit about what we think is going to come from all of what is going on in Boston right now. We're not going to talk too much about the developments in Boston because it is such a quickly moving situation. Everything is changing by the minute. So we don't want to give you information that by the time you hear it, it is completely stale. Unfortunately, as is the case with these types of situations, even while the situation was developing soon after the bombing, most of the reports that were put out during the first day were completely retracted by the second day. So if you're not reporting at the exact moment, by the time you report it, the information is already stale, as is unfortunately the situation. So RadChick, Christina, thank you so much for coming on once again. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, it's nice to be here again with you, Madison. Thank you.
Well, let's start off a little bit. Well, first, before we get into anything, please do mention how people can follow you and whatnot. And I'll have you mention it again later on in the show. But so people can just right now, type in your information so they can follow you. Please do give that out.
Well, the easiest way to find all my links would be at fukushimafacts.com. And there are links to my Facebook pages, to my Twitter account, and to the radio show, which airs Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's called Nuked Radio on UCY TV.
Awesome. Well, first, let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the wake of this situation in Boston, and what you is going to come of it. At the time of this recording, Boston is in a state of complete lockdown, and we're seeing, this actually, it's nothing new. There were, heavily armed, militarized police on the streets almost immediately after the bombings. The day after, it was reported that certain, National Guard units were deployed. There was, armored Humvees driving down the street in giant caravans and so on. But what do you think is going to be the long-lasting impact of this situation?
Well, more surveillance, more rules, more checkpoints, more police presence. It'll give a boost to our military-industrial complex and the security detail. And I recently had a conversation when I flew through Detroit Metropolitan Airport on April 1st. There was a bomb threat the morning that my family and I went to the airport to go on a trip to Mexico. And we were evacuated from the terminal, and the airspace was shut down, and Homeland Security was there, and it caused a big hassle for the people that were trying to fly out on one of the busiest days of the year. And when we returned from our trip, I spoke with a woman who worked as a taxi driver for the airport, and I asked her whatever was the outcome of that, because we never heard anything when we got to Mexico. And she said, well, I used to work in the jail, and so I have a little bit of experience with these things. And, every so often they run one of these drills so they can justify the money that's spent for security. And that's basically what I think will be the outcome of this. And our government has a long history of manufacturing crises so that they can enact whatever laws they want to have passed. And right now, of course, it's gun control.
What I think what was pretty interesting is, I believe it was either the day of the bombings, like later that day, or the day after, in a major news outlet, it might have been Fox News, there was an individual who, he was cited as, a security expert and contractor and that kind of stuff. And he was saying that there is without a doubt going to be major changes that occur, excuse me, because of this. He cited a much larger police presence at any kind of large event where there is any significant gathering of people. Of course, what I think we'll see is a lot more surveillance is what allowed these suspects to be identified. Of course, there are problems with, they're withholding any information that would actually be able to identify these people as suspects just in the public eye. Someone pointed out in an email, where are pictures of these guys setting down their bags? That seems like that would be one of the big things that they would want to point out. They put out pictures of them in crowds and stuff, but there's no images of them setting down bags near the bomb site, which would, make them suspects. And obviously, the FBI could be withholding it if they have the pictures, but one, must wonder why. And of course, the father of the two suspects was saying that if they killed the younger brother, he's sure it's an inside job. And he also said, all hell will break loose. So one must wonder what that means. But to call it an inside job is some pretty loaded language, obviously, given the common usage of the term. But Christina, don't you think that it's almost certain that beside a larger police presence at any kind of large gathering, that the almost certain outcome will be more surveillance cameras, in any large metropolitan area? Because if something were to happen in the future and there weren't those cameras there, then we would be out of luck. That would be the justification I could think of.
Yeah, I think at a minimum, I would expect that. And I mean, if you look at what's going on in Boston right now, of course, we're recording this on Friday afternoon. There's over 1 million people that are on lockdown right now because they're searching for suspects. And, you look at the streets of Boston right now, it looks like Baghdad with all the Humvees and the police. I mean, it looks like every police department in the Northeast is in Boston right now. And, that even if this was not a false flag manufactured event, then there was a significant failure in all of these surveillance things that are already in place, like the reading of emails and, the surveillance cameras that they have now. And they even had bomb-sniffing dogs at the Boston Marathon on the day of the event because they were running a drill, and they didn't detect any bombs. So, all these things that we already have in place failed significantly if this wasn't a manufactured event.
Yeah, what I thought was very interesting about the whole drill thing was, well, first of all, one thing that's unfortunate is people keep repeating something that is demonstrably false. They keep saying that the Boston Globe tweeted before the explosions that there would be a controlled explosion. That's actually patently false. You can just look at the screenshots that they use to show that that's the case. And even the screenshots that they use show that they're wrong. Most people have stopped saying that because it's clearly untrue. But some people continue to say that, unfortunately. Kevin Barrett of Truth Jihad, and he is also a writer for Press TV and Veterans Today, wrote that in an article he posted on both sites. He wrote that the Boston Globe tweeted 2 hours before the explosions that there was going to be a controlled explosion. That is simply untrue, and I pointed it out to him on Facebook twice. I messaged him. I left it in a comment on the Press TV thing. Apparently he has no interest in changing it because it really bothers me that people keep repeating this misinformation. How are we supposed to know what the truth is when they have no interest in actually reporting the truth? I personally find that troubling. But one thing about the drill that I thought was very interesting is the main source for that was a coach who he was I believe a cross country coach at the University of Mobile, and he said that they were saying after it happened, oh, this is just an exercise, don't be worried, and he drill. Later that day, the article was edited, and they removed the word drill from the article entirely, which I thought was interesting. They changed some of the quotes, removed some of the more interesting and questionable quotes. So I thought that was very interesting. Clearly, there's a problem with putting that out, that report, and it was changed. I haven't checked it in a few days, but it would be interesting to see if it was changed further. And it was interesting because a lot of major news outlets, they'll say when they change something, they'll add something. Oh, this was updated and changed for X, Y, or Z reason. They just changed it and didn't note that there was any changes. The only way that anyone reading it would know it is if they looked at the comments. So it's really hard to know what is true and what is untrue at this point about it. But I think what's important to note is that regardless of what the origin of the attack was, let's say it's totally infallibly proven that it was definitely not anything near a false flag, no government involvement whatsoever, it will be leveraged for their purposes. That is guaranteed. And I think, as you mentioned, it is a great way to say everything that we have in place already, the national security state, the hugely bloated Department of Homeland Security, the already massively over-militarized police force that we have in the United States, all of that isn't enough. We need more. Don't you think that is the logical conclusion that they'll come to, Christina?
Oh, absolutely. We'll just be waiting to see it happen over the next couple weeks. It's really sad and difficult to sit here and watch this go down the way that it is. And I think people are really getting hip to the whole scenario now because of the internet. But there is a lot of, not only, and I want to point out, the misinformation didn't just come from some alternative media sources. It came from mainstream sources as well. In fact, John King at CNN had retracted statements that he made about a person of interest that was was being held at a hospital under security, and that report came out and it turned out to be false. Although he never really apologized for that, and just back in the old days, that was a really, really big deal when you messed up on a story like this. And most reporters would have lost their jobs over it. And now this is kind of just the new way of reporting. We saw it happen with Sandy Hook, too, where there was this enormous amount. Even the principal is quoted as making a statement afterward, although it turned out that she had been shot. And just there's no repercussion for this false reporting. And it causes a lot of extra confusion in people.
Yeah, and I think it also causes a great deal of mistrust. I think a lot of people can cry false flag, immediately, and it's largely because I think it's most of the fault can be, or most of the blame can be placed squarely on these major media outlets, because everything that they report, they retract. Everything that they report in the first hours, they're like, well, none of that was true. Never mind. And they'll report, oh, there's a suspect being held, and it's been confirmed. Well, no, the FBI and Boston police say there wasn't a suspect. And then they'll say, oh no, there was a suspect. No, there wasn't. Oh, there's a bomb at the JFK library. Oh, never mind, it's just a fire. And that's where that Boston Globe tweet came from. Was they were saying that there would be a controlled demolition, assumedly of one of the other explosives that they reported that they found. Originally, they said they found 2 unexploded devices. Well, it turns out there wasn't any, according to them. These same news outlets come and they just retract everything. It was bomb. No, it was a fire. There was explosives. No, there wasn't any other. There was a suspect. Not a suspect. I mean, how can you know anything when they retract everything? I mean, and they shut down the cell phone networks. No, they didn't shut down the cell phone networks. It was just too many people using their cell phones at once. So, I mean, I can understand where people just want to jump to conclusions, but I think we have to maintain a healthy amount of hesitance when it comes to saying anything about something like this, especially when so much of the information is just either wrong or reported prematurely without checking sources, or later contradicted. It makes it very, very hard to know what is true in this situation. But I think, Christina, we can both agree, and I think the listeners can as well, that no matter what is the case, no matter if it's totally the government did it, let's say, for the sake of argument, or they had no involvement whatsoever, not even a little bit, either way, it will be leveraged in their favor, and not our favor, obviously. But, what I want to know is, how can they get more bloated, the Department of Homeland Security? How can the police get more militarized? How can there be more surveillance? I mean, is it going to be the kind of thing where whenever there's a large gathering of people like that, we just see like a full-on military-style presence where, there are people with assault rifles and armored vehicles on every block and stuff like that? I mean, that's the only way it could get more militarized, in my mind. I mean, what do you think there, Christina?
Oh, I think we have a long way to go where they could definitely put those changes into place. Just coming from Mexico, I saw that everywhere. There's police checkpoints along the highways. They walk around with assault rifles. All the police have assault rifles. People in Mexico are not allowed to own guns. And when I was younger, I lived in Spain for about 10 years, off and on, because of one of my parents' jobs. And we had that police presence there all the time in the airports, and there would be, tanks rolling down the street in the middle of the night. So it's something, I think they're getting us used to. And then there's people like Hunter S. Thompson and William Cooper who have warned about this for 10, 20, 30 years, that this police state was coming. And, knowing who owns the media, you have to wonder, too, how much of this misinformation and disinformation is intentional to cause more anxiety and to cause more chaos, so people will be begging for an extra police presence because they're scared.
Yeah, and one thing I found very interesting, as you mentioned earlier, we're recording this on the Friday, and obviously this is a quickly evolving situation. But one thing I noticed is people don't really seem to be interested in questioning the police's ability to just order everyone to stay inside for an indeterminate amount of time. That is clearly just a total restriction of free movement. And it seems like, I didn't see anyone really being like, hey, what? Stay inside? I mean, a lot of people who haven't been to Boston, it's not a massive city, it's not geographically the size of, say, Los Angeles or something, but they're telling a ton of people to lock their doors and stay inside and don't go outside for any reason. And that they're going door to door with these SWAT teams and stuff that are totally indistinguishable from a military unit. As you said, it looks like Baghdad. I find that troubling that they can just do that and no one's like, hey, what? You're searching for one 19-year-old suspect and you have to lock down the entire city of neighborhoods? I'm sorry, that seems like a little over the top. I mean, do you not find that kind of telling that people aren't saying, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, I think if this drags on through the weekend, that we might see some people questioning whether or not they need to take this as seriously as it's being presented to them. But that's going to be the new mantra, is that these things are being done for our protection. These things are being implemented to protect us from terrorists. I mean, you saw that over and over again ever since 9/11. With George W. Bush. How many times did he say that? We're protecting you from the terrorists.
Yeah, the big bad Al Qaeda under your bed is gonna come snatch you in the middle of the night unless you have TSA standing by to grope you.
Who is the real terrorist is the question that everybody should be asking themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And that unfortunately is something nowadays that'll instantaneously. I remember that the rapper Lupe Fiasco saying that Obama is the terrorist for the drone program, and boy did he get a lot of flack for that. But One thing that I think is important to note when we're thinking about this stuff is like you said, they're going to use it is for our safety, to keep us safe from the terrorist thing. And one thing that I noticed in some reporting, I was reading a CBS report just a couple hours ago, and this is on Friday again, but what they noted was that the older brother had 3 jihadi videos on his YouTube channel, and then a danger room report, which is a Wired blog, points out that this doesn't look like a foreign sponsored terrorist thing at all, because I mean they're like stealing cars and stuff like that. It's not your typical well-planned thing that is the picture we're presented with. So we have 2 conflicting images here, that they are foreign terrorists, and well, it doesn't really look like that at all. So by the time this airs, we're probably going to see the narrative change quite a bit. And I think for people listening, this will actually be very interesting, because we're talking about what we're seeing right now in kind of light detail. We could go into a lot more detail, but when we look back at the stuff that's originally presented later, it'll be interesting to see how much that has, how reports have changed, how various articles have been edited and tightened up to fit the narrative. I think it'll be quite fascinating to see what that is like. But either way, I think it's certain that we're going to see a much larger police presence, more surveillance, a justification for more funding to Homeland Security, so they can have, TSA Viper teams groping every single person at a marathon, dogs to sniff every single person who attends an event like that. I think that is very likely. But let's shift gears a little bit, Christina, and I've been kind of hogging this show, and I feel bad, and I want to let you tell us a lot about your recent interview that has been incredibly popular. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I started collecting stories for the past year of people who fly a lot and were exhibiting signs of radiation sickness or unexplained, unusual sickness. And I had a few here and there, and then there were, of course, the reports that came out towards the end of last summer where hundreds of flight attendants were calling in sick from Alaskan air. And I know that Alaska has been hit particularly hard by Fukushima fallout and continues to be. And people who were flying through this contaminated air column were exhibiting signs of radiation sickness, like they were losing hair and they were getting bloody noses and they were having skin problems. And then we had a few recent stories of 2 pilots 10 days apart that both passed out in mid-flight on routes to Alaska. And I had talked to Loren Murray, who's an atmospheric fallout expert and a whistleblower, former worker at a nuclear weapons lab, about the stories that I was collecting, and she started collecting them too. And just over the last 2 months, we've seen a really big increase in the number of people who are flying a lot, mainly like celebrities that are going to different speaking events, or they're on tour for concerts, or they're doing like reality shows and things, that are having problems either while they are on flights or after they land. They have to go to the hospital, or within 2 weeks of the flight, they are hospitalized. And some of these people are very well known. Kim Kardashian, she actually got sick on a plane ride from Europe, from Paris to Los Angeles, the week before she had flown to Nigeria and back. Lil Wayne had a number of seizures. He actually had 2 seizures on 2 separate flights within 24 hours of each other in November, and then he had some very serious seizures that happened in late February, where he was hospitalized. His heart rate went down to 30% of its normal value. They were actually considering giving him last rites. He almost died from this event. He was in intensive care for several days. Kelly Osbourne, who had recently flown and then afterward flew to Poland, had a seizure while she was on the set of filming her reality show. And Jessica Alba, Gwyneth Paltrow, both had symptoms of a neuromuscular disorder where they were hospitalized for what they thought was a stroke. In Jessica Alba's case, she said that she lost control of the muscles in her face and her heart was racing. And when she went to the hospital, they diagnosed her with carpal tunnel syndrome, which has nothing to do with facial paralysis. And Gwyneth Paltrow had recently, I think she had a cookbook or something that came out, and she talked about some recent health scares that she's had over the last 2 years. One was the miscarriage of her third child, which was also very severe. And another was that she had problems with her reproductive organs. She had a tumor on her ovary that had to be removed. She had symptoms of a stroke-like condition. And when she was hospitalized, they found out she was in early liver failure. She was anemic. She had problems with her vitamin D levels. And now she's going around interviewing for this cookbook saying that that it had to do with her having like vitamin D deficiency and migraines. But she was having symptoms of neuromuscular disease. And she actually put out a report on her blog stating that people shouldn't worry about Fukushima radiation, that the worrying is actually more detrimental to your health, and that we're all fine. And we're not fine, and I don't know who gave her that kind of advice or what kind of doctors she's seen, but she's had significant exposure from all the flying that she's done, and I confirmed this when I flew from Detroit to Cancun and back because I took an inspector Geiger counter with me. And Medcom, who makes the inspector, states on their website that the radiation levels in flight should be around 200 CPM at 30,000 feet. And I was getting 1,100. The highest number I had was 1,395. And this was over a duration of hours and hours. In fact, just in one leg of our journey, we got hit with 200,000 total counts. Which should have been about 6,000 total counts. So, I mean, we got massively exposed. And you do have, higher levels in flight because of gamma radiation from the sun and so forth, and because we do have atmospheric fallout remnants from bomb testing still up there. In fact, about 85% of the nuclear material used in atmospheric testing is still floating around in the upper atmosphere. So we expect higher levels, but not anywhere near what I was getting. And we've had some other independent researchers who have taken Geiger counters on planes and recorded the same. When I sent my video to Lorraine Murray, when I got back, she just said, "Oh my God, I knew the air column was contaminated. I had no idea that it was this bad." So, as far as like frequent flyers go, I mean, this is a huge issue. People that work on planes, is it possible that the pilots are passing out because of their continued exposure at these high levels, or that the flight crews are having symptoms because of their continued exposure? And, I know these people have unions. They really all need to be wearing dosimeters, and these dosimeters need to be turned into an independent monitoring agency, not the airline agency, who may just tell them, yeah, it's fine, and at the very least they should be getting hazard pay. If they're getting exposed to these levels all the time, this is really quite dangerous to their health, and for people who fly a lot for work also. And since we released that, we've had about 80,000 views just in a couple weeks, and the comments under these videos are just extraordinary. Similar stories of people who have flown and gotten sick. And when I went to Mexico the first day after we were there, I started getting some really severe edema in my feet, and I've already got some immune system problems that I've been diagnosed with, and a possible pre-leukemia condition. And I was aware of all that before we went, and I took the risk of going, knowing that I was probably going to get exposed in the flight. But I had an opportunity to spend some quality time with my family, and it was actually a birthday present from my daughters to go on this trip. And I would do it again, but knowing that I need to really detox before, during, and after a trip like that. I ended up with just a massive kidney infection and bladder infection, and I was sent to the hospital as an emergency situation by the third day because the swelling was so bad. And originally they thought I was in either kidney failure or heart failure. I mean, that's how serious this was. So, it's something for people who are flying a lot to either get Geiger counters and start recording this, or search on YouTube for this, and they should probably be talking to their employers if this is a requirement of their job, that they need to fly on a regular basis, that they're getting some kind of hazard pay for it, or some really good insurance benefits, because they're going to need them if they keep getting exposed like this.
And you think the reason that we're not hearing more about this is because people aren't just putting two and two together, or they're reporting it to their jobs, and their jobs are saying, oh, it's totally unrelated, because obviously the jobs don't want to be on the hook. The employers rather don't want to be on the hook for all of the medical bills and what have you, which obviously they would be if it was a direct result of their duties for that job. What do you think the reason is why we aren't hearing more about this?
Well, because this would be a huge blow to our economy. And right at the beginning, when Fukushima first happened and the reactors exploded, the NTSB considered grounding all flights in the northern hemisphere until the radiation levels went down, and they made the decision not to do that because of the economic impact that would have had. And we have verification of what these levels were from the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization that measured it. We have all the simulations of cesium and different isotopes that were recorded. We have the USGS soil samples that were done but were shut off. They stopped testing after April 5th of 2011, after they detected Fukushima fallout across the entire United States. They shut down all the testing and said they didn't need to do it anymore. And, this situation is ongoing at the plant. We have 3 reactors that have gone into meltdown, and there's been nothing done to contain anything at that site. So there's still radiation that's leaking out of the plants, going into the air. What is already from the reactor explosions gone up into the atmosphere is circling the planet and being measured every 40 to 45 days. This was reported by universities in Japan. And, it's something we just have to learn, I guess, how to live with, because it's not going away anytime soon. And a lot of these isotopes that have been measured, like the cesium that blew out of the plants and continues to circle the globe, that's just one isotope from these reactors, and there were anywhere from 1,300 to 1,600 different radioactive elements that came from those reactor explosions, and all of them will hurt your health. And the more you're exposed, the more profoundly your health will be affected. And looking at this problem in its broadest, most simple terms, this is not going away. We're getting exposed to it not only if you're flying a lot, but we're getting, smaller amounts, of course, in the food that we're eating, in the water that we're drinking. It's even in the milk supply. We actually import milk protein powder from Russia that's too radioactive for people in Russia to give their people, so they ship it to the United States and they mix it into all kinds of dairy products to boost the protein content, because our levels are so much higher here than they are in Russia or Europe or even in Japan. So we're, over your lifetime, you're getting exposed to a lot, plus the plumes that we all were exposed to at the beginning of the accident, which we all should have really been inside for a period of probably a month. And this fallout landed everywhere, and it's getting up, there's uptake in the plants now and all the crops that are growing. So you have to try to reduce your total count and your total exposure wherever you can, if that means that you buy produce from South America, or that you fly less, or that you filter your water, whatever you can do. And this is more important for kids than it is for adults, because children are still in their stages of development, and their DNA is their cells are dividing, and that's what radiation affects, is the DNA in cellular division.
And one thing that I of course, always springs to mind when we're talking about stuff like this is how I believe it was the EPA that completely redefined the levels of safe radiation. Do you think that's involved here? How obviously they're not going to say these levels are unsafe because they've been redefined to be safe, whereas before it would not be the case at all.
Well, yeah, I know that the EPA has withheld a lot of that information, and at times when the radiation levels are high, they've turned off their monitors and said that they're changing filters or that there's a problem with the monitor. But in talking with Loren and her long history of working in a nuclear weapons lab, what she told me is that the EPA, the National Institutes of Health, and the CDC were all set up basically to hide nuclear fallout that we were exposed to during atmospheric testing, and that kind of morphed into, all the nuclear plants that were then built, which was for plutonium manufacturing, so we could make bombs. They weren't initially designed to boil water and make electricity. They were designed to generate plutonium for weapons production. So they're basically bomb-making plants right under our noses. And these plants, on normal operating conditions, release to the water supply, they release to the air supply when they have problems, like what is going on right now in Chicago at the LaSalle plant, which was hit by lightning a couple days ago. They vented the entire contents of their containment into the air, and there's been no warnings for anybody downwind of that plant to stay indoors. And, this is it's terrible to know that people are being poisoned like this without their knowledge, but that's what our government does. They don't care. There's a long history of all kinds of inhuman radiation experiments that have been done that are documented and verified, and some of them were top secret until recently because of some books that were written actually since 1999 about some of the secret government experiments that were done on people, prisoners, people in schools, people that were in mental health facilities. People in St. Louis were sprayed with radioactive elements by the U.S. Army, and then they tracked the sickness back through the healthcare system, through the public health departments in St. Louis. And a sociologist in St. Louis recently reported on this. And you saw it in the news for a couple of days, and then it disappeared.
Yeah, I was about to mention that, it's not only military personnel and prisoners and stuff like that are subjected to these tests. Sometimes it's entire cities, and that's what I think of when I think of stuff like this. This massive these releases in large urban areas. How can they get away with anything like?
Well, they're
that?
getting away
with
it. Right now with you live in L.A. and Rocketdyne is in L.A. It's now owned by Boeing, and Rocketdyne actually had two meltdowns. One in 1959, which was as bad as 3 Mile Island, and another one in 1963, which was never reported except for people who worked at the plant that said 80% of the nuclear fuel that was in their research reactor melted down and the public was never told. Now, there's been a number of people, and we covered this also in this celebrity interview that we did with Kim Kardashian and all the people I had just talked about. In the past, though, there's been quite a few celebrities that have been nuked without their knowledge, and one of them was the entire cast of a movie called The Conqueror. John Wayne was the lead actor in this movie, and Susan Hayward was the lead actress. Both of them died of very severe aggressive cancers years later. In fact, out of 212 people that worked on the set, which was just downwind of a atmospheric testing facility in Utah that had detonated 11 atomic bombs the year before, 90 of those people came down with cancer, and epidemiologists have stated that was an absolute epidemic. And the families came out and they actually gave interviews with People magazine that you can look up, saying that they know nuclear fallout killed their parents. And, the types of cancers that arise from this nuclear exposure are very aggressive. Often they're adrenal. We see a lot of pancreatic cancers or cancers in multiple organs that are usually already metastasized by the time the person finds out they have it. It's already in like 3 or 4 organs. And that's what happened to John Wayne. That's what happened to Susan Hayward. It happened to the director of the movie who ended up shooting himself because of it. It happened to many of the people who worked on Little House on the Prairie, including Michael Landon, who actually bought the property next to the Simi Valley facility to shoot Little House on the Prairie. And many of the people who worked on that series came down with cancer and other strange diseases. Patrick Swayze, who died of pancreatic cancer 2 years after he was diagnosed. He lived in Simi Valley. He shot a number of films there. And Vince Neil, who lived in Chatsworth, which is like right next to the Santa Susana Rocketdyne facility, he had a 4-year-old daughter that died of a very severe stomach cancer. They had moved into this house around the time she was born. And by the time she was 4, she was dead. And this tumor that she had weighed like 4 or 5 pounds, and she only weighed 30 pounds. And he actually sued Rocketdyne. And he was interviewed by the LA Times about this lawsuit back in, I think that was 1999 as well, because of a health study that had came out on Rocketdyne workers showing how the really strong propensity that people who worked at the plant were for getting aggressive type cancers. He put 2 and 2 together. He looked into the cleanup that was done from the contamination from the meltdowns that had been at that facility. And, what he was saying was, they scraped off the first foot of soil and said that the area had been decontaminated, and then they built $1 million houses on it. And the stuff was way down into the ground because it had happened decades before. So there was another lawsuit after there was a problem with the statute of limitations for Vince Neil. He had to give up the lawsuit that he had started with Rocketdyne. But there was another lawsuit a few years later. They hired Chris Busby to go to the site, and he took water samples, and he found actual fission products with short half-lives that were existing in the LA drinking water, which meant that a nuclear reactor was running in the vicinity at the time that he took those measurements. And Rocketdyne at that time had their license revoked. They weren't even supposed to have a reactor, but they did. They had one running. That was the only explanation there could be for short-lived isotopes in LA's drinking water.
How do they get away with this? That's what I want to know. I mean, it seems like, if they were able to show any of this evidence, there would be such a massive backlash. I mean, do the people who take no stand against this, in terms of, governmental agencies and so on, do they not realize that they're affected by this as well?
Well, it's almost impossible to go up against the nuclear industry or the government in any way without some type of class action lawsuit. And radiation cases are difficult to prove, and you have to have somebody who's like an environmental law specialist, like Paul Garner, who is now suing TEPCO on behalf of the 70,000 U.S. servicemen and women that were exposed to radiation from Fukushima when they were helping out during the relief actions after the 9.0 tsunami. The reactors blew up and nobody told them it was dangerous, and it should have come from TEPCO. So now those guys and girls are coming down with they're getting metastatic tumors, they have leukemia, they're having tumors in the eye, birth defects, all kinds of heart problems, bleeding problems. There's, I think, so far about 150 of them that have joined this lawsuit. They're probably all going to get sick from this because they were exposed to MOX. They were just right off the coast when these plants blew up. But to, look at the situation in LA, I mean, if everybody in LA knew how bad the situation was and that Rocketdyne was at fault, everybody in LA could sue Rocketdyne. But you need to have a lawyer who's going to be willing to take that on and probably get trashed over it. They'll be attacked, they'll be hacked, they'll have all kinds of government interference because the nuclear industry is terrified of people finding out how dangerous this stuff is, how bad it is for our health. We could have lawsuits going on downwind of every nuke plant in the entire country.
That's a great point, and it is obviously that's a massive monetary incentive we're talking about. And of course, the government has an interest in keeping these plants going, so they can continue to get the fuels for warheads.
Yeah. Well, Loren had told me that because Chris Busby was British, he could get away with doing the independent research for this too. It would be impossible to get a nuclear scientist to attest or to testify as an expert witness in the States because they would lose their job. They would be retaliated against for participating in any kind of lawsuit. You'd have to bring in people that are either independent scientists or, from another country, someone like Chris Busby, to testify if you wanted any chance of winning. And what happened with that case where Busby took the water samples is that Rocketdyne settled out of court. And it was for a very, very large amount. It was for hundreds of millions with these, I think there were 20 families in total that had sued.
Well, and obviously we can only imagine what a sum like that would be if it was an entire city or even just a small community of a few thousand people suing.
Well, you should talk to people in your community because you're right there.
Yeah, I know, and I think a lot of people are kind of inculcated in this mindset where unless it's on CNN, it's not happening. I mean, that's really how most people operate nowadays with any issue, for that matter.
Yeah, until it's happening to your immediate family. But I mean, these problems, these health problems with people that are flying a lot and these celebrities and so forth, from the Fukushima fallout that's contaminating our air column, this problem isn't going away. So we can put this information out there now, and 6 months from now or 12 months from now, we'll see what happens. I'm pretty confident that we're going to continue to see these kinds of issues in the long term, and so people hopefully will wake up to it before it affects them too profoundly.
And if we start seeing this on a much larger scale, I'm sure there is going to be some kind of explanation rolled out that has nothing to whatsoever, so the blame can be shifted. Do you have any idea what kind of explanation they might give for these massive rises in incidence of cancer and so on?
Oh, they'll need a scapegoat for sure. I don't know. They could they'll try to blame it on somebody for sure to get you to look away from them. I'm interested in seeing how they're going to blame all the rated pension funds and things like that when people start finding out about that. Where's all the money gone? When we start having a significant crash with the stock market, which is coming, it hasn't happened yet because I don't think they've let it happen. They're looking for a scapegoat to blame it on, because if people found out how much has been raided from these coffers, these politicians are going to be hung. And so they need to find someone to blame it on. What are they going to blame the nuke stuff on? I don't know. Maybe North Korea. They'll blame some kind of false flag event on them. They seem to be, hitting the drums pretty hard about that. At least they were while I was gone. That was pretty much all we saw in the news outlets in Mexico. And maybe they'll try to blame it on Japan and on Fukushima and finally fess up to that. But it's been a problem long before the Fukushima accident. The accident put the nuclear fallout on a lot of people's radar for the first time. But when you start looking back historically at what's happened, we got nuked back in the 50s and 60s when they started detonating atomic bombs on our own soil. And that was part of why they created the RICA from the Department of Justice. They actually have a fund to pay the healthcare costs of people who lived in certain states where they exploded atomic bombs. And I know Utah is one for sure, Nevada, probably parts of Montana and Idaho. If you developed cancer between like 1950 and 1970, you can get a payout from the government. It's called RECA, and it's on the Department of Justice website. And we kind of need something like that for anyone who lives downwind of a nuke plant now, and anyone who lives downwind of Fukushima, which is pretty much everybody in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, and the crazy thing to me is that they would restrict it so much given the sheer number of these atmospheric tests that have been conducted. I mean, is it the type of thing where if it's an atmospheric test, it's just limited, the effects are just limited to that the area directly underneath where it took place? Or are these the kinds of things that actually go into the air and stay there and are kind of dispersed over a large area?
85% of the fallout from atmospheric testing is still in the upper atmosphere from explosions. The rest of it fell out downwind of wherever the explosion or wherever the test was conducted that day based on the wind patterns and rain out. And in fact, they would have government workers out offering free car washes for people who were in the vicinity of these nuclear bomb tests, and they would measure the cars with Geiger counters and then give you your free car wash and then measure your car again and then send you on your way. But they would tell everybody there's nothing to worry about.
Wow, and that reminds me of the soldiers scrubbing the ships after they got hit by a plume right after Fukushima. Are those the same Navy soldiers that are actually part of that lawsuit, the ones that were hit by those giant plumes immediately after the meltdowns?
Yeah, I remember seeing that video on CNN right after the accident, and the first thing I noticed was, wow, they're not wearing respirators or any protective gear. That's really crazy. And
Yeah,
it was
none.
only one ship that they talked about, the USS Ronald Reagan, which is really odd when you think that Reagan worked for GE. He was a spokesman for GE, and GE built the Fukushima reactors, and then they exposed this ship named after Reagan to nuclear fallout. I mean, isn't that just a crazy coincidence? But it was a whole battalion. There were like 6 or 7 destroyers that were part of this mission, and a large number of smaller support ships. There were 70,000 people in total that were either on these ships or on bases located in the northern part of Japan that would have been exposed to this fallout quite severely.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not really the case that these giant naval ships just hang out by themselves in the middle of the ocean with no allies around them. That's not really how it works usually. But we just have a couple minutes left here. Why don't you once again give out the information about your show and how people can follow your work on Facebook and elsewhere, because obviously you have a ton more information than we could ever hope to cover in this show, and I want people to actually be able to look into all that information for themselves, because the wealth of information you've collected over the past couple years now is just staggering.
Yeah, I started doing the radio show a year after the Fukushima accident, and we originally started it as kind of like a crash course in radiation, and we were only going to do it for a month, and we did it for 5 days a week. And after a month, people were like, "You got to keep doing the show. I love this show. I'm learning so much." And I'm learning too, because nothing makes you learn more when you're going to be teaching it to somebody else. You want your information to be right. You want it to be verifiable. And teaching the nuke stuff, I mean, they make it all very complicated, but it's actually very easy to understand. It's all bad for you, and it will all affect your health in very profound ways. And anything you can do to minimize it in your environment is a good thing. And a lot of it just has to do with eating healthy and being a healthier person and boosting your immune system by like getting enough sleep and taking vitamins and reducing stress and things like that. So we do the show now Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes Jules is my co-host. I have Noki Travers from radwatch.info, who does graphing across the whole United States. He joins me also, and we have some friends who make guest appearances from England and different places that share their stories. And just recently I made friends with a woman named Mary Osborne, who's the mutation lady of 3 Mile Island. And it's funny because I came across her images when I started seeing mutations in my area the first couple months after Fukushima, and that's kind of grown into this huge thing. We have a page called Mutation Watch on Facebook, and we have a Tumblr account called Mutation Watch also, and people can send us images of like strange plants or produce or things they find, and we're compiling it for researchers. And I'm not aware of anyone else doing that right now, but people did it after Chernobyl, after 3 Mile Island, and now we're doing it after Fukushima. And if you look at all the images side by side, they all look the same. It does the same thing to plants. It screws with their DNA. And if it happens to plants and animals, it's happening to people. And if you've noticed lately, there's been quite a few stories of like 2-headed pigs and 2-headed sharks and things like that in the news. And even the news is questioning what's going on here. Why are all these mutations? Well, it's probably from Fukushima.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. We're out of time. You have been listening to End the Lie Radio here on UCY.tv. I've been your host, Madison Rupert, and of course my website is endthelie.com. Until next week, thank you so much for listening, everyone. Take care.